Hello everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the first ever episode of Dragons Digits, the show where we believe everyone has the ability to analyze League of Legends at a high level. Today's episode will be broken into 4 parts. In the first part, we'll be taking a basic dive into some data analysis. In the second part, we'll be talking about common misconceptions and the importance of visual support. In the third part, we'll be talking about different player styles and team makeups and how that can affect some data analysis. And in the fourth and final part, we'll be putting it all into practice, and I'll be making my argument for the player I think is the most underrated in the North American LCS. So, let's start by talking about what is data analysis. So, as far as I'm concerned, data analysis is really just 3 steps. The first step is trying to represent ideas we see in the game or opinions we have about the game numerically. The second step is using those numbers in unique and creative ways to reshape or evolve the way we see the game. And the third step is putting into practice our new ideas or outlook and reflecting on what did and what didn't work. So, as you can see, I think it's about these 3 steps. Now, you basically just rinse and repeat those 3 steps and you have data analysis. Successful data analysis is very logic-based and methodical. Okay? So, now I'm gonna walk you through each step of the data analysis process and try to use examples. So, for this walkthrough, we're going to be using Oracle's Elixir, the website Oracle's Elixir. It is the largest and most useful, or at least what I've found to be the largest and most useful, public statistical database. Some teams might have better ones, but it is the best that I've seen publicly. It covers all the major regions and many different leagues, including Academy, and it dates all the way back to 2015. So that's what we're going to be using. Okay, so for the first step, like we said, it was trying to represent ideas we see in the game or opinions we have about the game numerically. So, this is really just very simple. It can be very simple. So, let's just start with the simplest thing out there. We want to find a way to represent how many times we're killing the enemy person, because this is a game about, at its core, people attempting to kill other players in the game, right? So, we want to track how many times we've killed the other person. Well, as many of you know, we've developed a stat for that. This is called kills. It's right here. Alright, this tracks how many times a player has been killed, or has killed the other person, right? So, well, maybe we're like, okay, well, we've got that. Now we want to try to find a way to track how many times we've died to somebody, how many times we've fed somebody else a kill. And again, that's deaths, But what if you're like, okay, well, I know how many times I've directly killed the other team, but what about just if I'm helping out? If I'm not the one actually doing it, but I'm helping making it happen, and blammo, you have assists, right? Now, this may seem very basic, but data analysis isn't a complicated thing. It's a thing that's very easy to understand, and so obviously this is a simple example, but we want to start with something that everybody can get on board with, right? Now, these numbers don't have to be just simple numbers. We can use those numbers to make something a bit more complicated. So say we want to do a bit of work now. We want to go, well, let's have something with a bit more substance, because just kills, deaths, and assists by itself doesn't really say that much, right? So say we want to find a way to track how many kills we've been a part of, either directly gotten or helped in getting, right? Per every time we die or give the other team a kill, right? So basically our kills plus our assists divided by our deaths, right? Now, this is a very common thing, stat for people to keep track of. It's KDA. It's right here, right? It's not a stat you can see. And again, it's very simple, but that's we're starting at a low level. You know what I mean? Okay, so let's try to tackle something a bit more difficult. Let's try to put a problem to it, So we want to see, how useful are we really being? How much are we doing to the other team, right? Well, maybe we go through and check how much damage we're doing to the other team for every minute of the game that happens, right? This is this stat right here, is damage per minute in the game, right? Now, I'm just going to take a second, okay? I want you to think about what problems or what drawbacks there may be with just tracking just damage per minute, right? What limitations might that have? Okay, so just take a second, think about it. Okay, so I'm assuming maybe you pause the video or something, right? There's a lot to come up with, right? Obviously, in longer games, you're going to be doing more damage. Your damage ramps up as the game goes on, right? So that stat can be skewed for that. Anybody who wins more games seems to win. Obviously, their damage per minute is going to look higher most of the time. We'll talk a bit more about that, the effect of winning later. And, you know, it's just not really the best stat in and of itself, you know? What if your team just likes to play an aggressive play style, right? So maybe we want a stat that's a little bit better, right? So what if we want a stat to just see sort of what percentage of your team's damage are you doing, right? How much of your team's damage are you contributing towards? And what share of that are you doing? Because that way everybody's on a little bit more of an even playing field in a win or a loss, or a shorter game or a longer game. It's not really going to have a large effect either way, right? So people have already been there. People have already tracked that stat. And as you can see here, that's this damage percentage stat. That's the percentage of your team's damage that you contribute to, right? And that's really the core of representing ideas numerically. You're working through the problem. You know, it's like putty in your hands. You're adapting basic stats into slightly more complicated stats and trying to put it all together into something that really represents something. Okay, so that's the first step, and it's the easiest step of the three. So now we're going to move on to the second step, which is actually using those numbers to accomplish something. Using those numbers to change our view of the game and the way we might see the game or what we understand, right, about the game. Basically getting us to learn something. Okay, so we're gonna just start by forming a theory or forming a basis to something. Okay, so we're gonna say, let's try to make a stat that represents early game success and the strength in the lane. Now, let's look at the stats we have here and see what might be pertinent to and important to early game success. Okay, so I've already gone ahead and done this myself, right? And I thought that we would just work with these three stats over here that you see on the right, okay? And these three stats are gold differential at 10 minutes, XP differential at 10 minutes, and CS differential at 10 minutes, right? And what these each mean is basically how far ahead you are of your lane opponent at 10 minutes in gold, XP, and CS. Right? Now, for this example, I'm looking just at the mid laners. We're going to be talking about AD carries in a little bit, but for this, we're just going to be looking at the mid laners. So I feel like, you know, these stats all are very representative of early game strength and your lane ability, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here. And over here, I've taken, on this data sheet, I've taken all the mid laners in North America that played in the 2018 summer, and I've written down over the course of that regular season what their gold differential at 10, XP differential at 10, and CS differential at 10 is, okay? Now, let's try to form this number into something that represents just an early game score, okay? So the way I'm going to try to do this is I'm going to look at these stats, and as far as I'm concerned, if you look at sort of the general like size of each of these numbers, they're relatively similar. However, these are quite a bit smaller. So what I'm going to do to try to get them all on to have an even effect in the final number is I'm going to take this early game score to be equal to the player's gold differential at 10, right, plus their XP differential at 10, right? And obviously, if this is a negative number, then it's going to subtract from the total. And then plus, and I'm going to go 10 times the CS differential at 10, okay? So our new early game score is our gold differential at 10, XP differential at 10, and 10 times our CS differential at 10. Okay, so now we can generate an early game score for each of our 10 mid laners in the North American LCS. Okay, now let's rank this score. Okay, from the highest to the lowest, and this is how each of our North American LCS mid laners rank on our new early game score, right? Now we're just gonna get back to this in a second, right? About whether or not our conclusions match what we think of the game or match what we think makes sense, right? What can we take from our stats and what do we think is important in our stats, right? So I want you to take a second to think about does this make sense? Does this match what you would have said? If you thought to yourself, who are the best laners in North America, would you have come up with a list that was similar to this list? Now, when I looked at myself, right, I looked at this list and saw that for the most part I actually generally agree. The three highest by far were Jensen, Bjergsen, and Power of Evil, and I would have said that they were the three best laners in North America last year by a pretty decent margin. I think that, there's some results that I might not have agreed with. I would have thought that Forbidden was a better laner than Demonte, for example, last year, early game. Or perhaps you thought, who he deserved to be higher or he deserved to be lower, right? Whatever you want to take from it. But I think this is generally pretty indicative. You've got your strong mid laners at the top and maybe your mid laners that had a bit of a weaker season at the bottom, right? So what can we take from this? What we can take from this is that this supports our idea that Power of Evil, Bjergsen, and Jensen were three of the best laners in North America. And it supports our idea that gold differential and XP differential and CS differential at 10 are an important part of tracking early game success. Okay? So now let's try that again, right, quickly. Let's go for more late game. What do we think matters for late game? Well, generally most kills, most fights happen late game, right? So maybe we want to focus more on, damage per minute. How much damage are you doing, right? And maybe KDA, right? And those are going to be our late game metrics of success, right? Because generally if you're doing well in team fights and if you're helping your team win later in the game, you're going to have a high damage and you're going to have a high KDA because those can be much more easily swung the later the game goes, right? So just as another example of something we could go into. I'm not going to do it the same way in depth in the sheet, but maybe you write down the damage and the KDA and you find a way to sort of connect them and compare them and make your own late game stat. You can do that if you want. Pause this video if you think it's going to be interesting. I don't know. It's up to you. Okay, so now on to the third and final stat, right? Which is really what we've just already been doing a bit, but whether or not the information we had gleaned from our stats, whether that was important, what we could put into effect from our stat, and what we think worked and what we think didn't work, right? So what I want you to do right now is I want you to take about 20 seconds, okay, and think about this stat. We already talked a bit about what worked, but I want you to think about what didn't work, okay? Okay, so honestly, I thought it went pretty well. I thought this was a pretty successful early games stat in general. It matched the way I viewed the game. However, you may have noticed one of several problems. Like, for example, the CS stat isn't really all that necessary because, your CS lead is going to show in both your XP lead and your gold lead, so it's almost redundant to be including the CS in there. Maybe you thought, well, that's not the only important thing. How many like roams were they doing? It doesn't include that. It doesn't include, maybe they were pushing their enemy out or they were helping create leads in other lanes. So there are plenty of things that you could maybe do to get a more complete response the next time around, right? But it's all about building on what we have, right? So obviously, we can see that while this was very useful and solidified some views we may have, we're not getting a very good full picture viewpoint. So how can we really ensure that we're making the right conclusions from our statistics, and what pitfalls must we avoid falling into? I think that's something you may be wondering right now. And to answer that question, I'm just going to ask you to tune into the next part of Dragon's Digits, where all that and more will be covered. Thank you, everybody. I enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.